Welcome to Yappin Dollahs, a mini series I originally created under the Marketing Woman podcast. If you've been following me on LinkedIn or the Marketing Woman podcast on LinkedIn, you know the podcast is evolving. But I could not share this one. That said, this conversation was recorded with the Marketing Woman podcast spirit and vision in mind. So today and tomorrow, I'm dropping 2 special episodes under the Yappin Dollahs name. So what's Yappin Dollahs? Whether you're a startup founder, someone with cash looking to invest, or just trying to understand the money world a little better, this series is for you. We're diving into venture capital, business growth, and everything in between, making it simple, unfiltered, and relatable. Episodes drop today and tomorrow, and in today's episode, I sat down with Isabella Mandis, founder of Girls into VC and Forbes 30 Under 30 honoree, to talk about the world of venture capital, especially what it's like entering that world as a student and a young founder. We've covered why she started Girls into VC, what young women need to know about funding, how she thinks about community, power, and ownership of tech. Whether you're a founder, a student, or just curious about how the next generation of VCs are thinking, this is a conversation you do not want to miss. Let's get into it. Oh, hi, Isabella. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited for this.
Of course. I know it's been a lot of back and forth, and I'm just excited to do this finally. I love your story, and I love Girls into VC. Loved seeing you at Harvard. So I thought I'll ask you a few questions if you're ready for it.
Yeah, you're so sweet. Thank you.
All right, perfect. So can you first of all share the story behind founding Girls into VC? What inspired you, and what was the initial vision?
Yeah, so I'm going to go back quite far to second grade, which is where I became obsessed with Apple. I loved Apple. I loved technology. Knew that was the way of the future and what I wanted to do. And so learned how to code, started getting into tech, thought I would be in tech long term. Realized that I didn't want to be a software engineer as much as it was really fun and technology was great. There are other parts of tech that were more interesting to me. And so started working at startups when I was in high school. Really loved that. Thought that was incredible. I started meeting with founders who were students at Stanford and Harvard and other schools like that were in college and building companies. And the fact that you could be building a company at 18, 19, 20 years old that was going to change the world and be one day a future Apple was just absolutely incredible to me. And so that was really my first startup bug. And then I ended up hearing about venture capital through a mentor of mine who was part of the dorm room fund, which is a fund for students to invest in other students. Thought that was incredible. Knew that the second I stepped on campuses, since it's hard enough to get into VC as a college student, let alone a high school student. So I kind of put that on the back burner until I got to college. And then I think the day I stepped on campus, researched every single VC org you can join, everything entrepreneurship, and went to all the events my first semester at school, and was the only girl at literally all of them. And that was really weird for me because I went to an all-girls school growing up and also just surrounded by girls in my family. And so I was shocked by that and wanted to build a community similar to what I had at Girls Who Code. And so decided to start Girls into VC. So it was December, I forget the exact day, December something, my freshman year, which is 2022. So about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago now. The initial vision really was just, I want to build a community. So posted on LinkedIn, hey, I've built this thing. Website literally was just an interest form. People submitted that, posted, got hundreds of thousands of views and people reaching out and wanting to join and things like that. So I spent basically, I guess exactly this time ago, 2 years ago, reaching out to basically every single person that filled out the form. I had Zooms all day, every day, just talking to people, being what do you want from this? Because of course I had my vision and I am the target audience. So it was helpful in that sense, but also the whole point of this was to build a larger community. So what did other people want? Got on calls with people, realized that people wanted a lot of content of what is VC and how to break into it. So started with that. And yeah, now we've been growing since then.
That is so exciting. I also went to a girls' school, so I can totally relate to that one. Yeah. I mean, it's been a great journey, right? What would you say have been some of the rewarding moments since you've started this community?
Oh my goodness. I think our conference is probably some of the most rewarding times. I mean, it is so much work putting together events, but really like seeing everyone come together in person is just really, really special. And people, especially since we started our fellowship about last year, getting to have, well, not everyone, of course, from our fellowship, since we're online, but having a lot of people come to our conference this year was so special because it was people who had been, meeting on Zoom every week and who have been FaceTiming and getting to know each other and working on projects, actually getting to meet in person and go have lunch together and dinner in Boston and just explore was something really, really special.
Oh, that's so sweet. That's really amazing, actually, because when I was back in undergrad, I wouldn't have even thought about creating a community for just girls. And looking at this, I'm like, what if someone else also wants to do this? And what kind of advice would you have for someone that wants to build a community in a field like this, but then they don't really know where to start because it's so competitive, or maybe nobody else is doing it?
Yeah, I think I like how you touched on the point that it's like there's so many communities out there and it's really hard for people to, I'm part of so many communities and it's hard to like keep track of so many. So one, like definitely finding a niche. I found that there are a lot of programs. Obviously, we need a lot of work on it, but there are a lot of programs of like bringing women into being founders and entrepreneurs and things like that, but none really focus on the VC side of things. So I think that was one niche that I was able to carve out. But really talking to people, finding out what people want. It's one thing for you to be like, oh, this is what I want, but another thing to talk to people, but also take that with a grain of salt because sometimes people don't always know what they want. There's one quote, I forget who said it, but it's like, oh, if you ask people in the 1700s what they wanted, they'd say a faster horse, but they really needed a car. So like people don't always know what they want, but to talk to them and see. And then also kind of looking to what exists around you and whether you want to build something very local or you want to build something international. I kind of go back and forth on which one's better. I still don't really know. Girls into VC, we run internationally. Sometimes I'm like, oh, would it be better in Boston? But I also didn't want to just start something specific to Harvard since I felt like we have a lot of resources at the school. But yeah, so I think trying to focus on your niche and figure out like geographically exactly where you want to be and come up with a plan for the future, even though that can shift.
Right. You're talking about the international community aspect. There are both pros and cons to that. But what would you say is like most rewarding when it comes to building an international community?
Yeah, even just across the country, it's so rewarding having so many people, let alone, I feel like the international part, sometimes I don't really process since it's hard to like look at a number of countries and really understand that. But even just having people, fly in from California to come to our conference and things like that just seems so insane to me. And I'm so grateful.
Yeah, I remember the event that I was at and it was like so many people from so many places. I'm like, wow, it's such women. Like what? Yeah,
it's totally pretty crazy.
Yeah. Obviously, you've been in leadership position for a while. What lesson would you say you've learned from this journey? And it doesn't have to be just one. If you have a couple, totally fine.
Yeah. I think that growing up and talking to founders, I always heard founders on podcasts and things talking about how hard it is to be a founder. And for me, I always thought, oh, well, they're just complaining, like they have the good life. They're not reporting to a boss. They're building their own company. Like how much better could it get? And I think with Girls into VC, one, I'm lucky in that, I'm founding something, but it's not a business, not a company. I'm not relying my livelihood on it, all of that. And even with that as like a passion project, it is so much work and so much dedication, and it is so hard to manage everything that's going on, and you're juggling with ideas and your vision for the future, and it is so incredibly hard that I cannot even imagine these founders who are building these companies and how much of their hard work and soul they are literally putting into a company that they are building, and the added pressure of like, people like are selling houses to build companies so that they can finance it. Like there's so many more pressures that people have that I don't have when building Girls into VC that I can even only imagine the pressure that they must be under. So I feel like so in awe of everything people do.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it's a very different one, but I also think like you're juggling school and so much more when you're doing this. So yeah, it's still hard work. I think one of the biggest things about VC and like when people think about funding, especially when you don't really know what it is, I also did the same mistake, which is like not understanding the difference between venture capital and private equity. And if someone wants to get into it and wants to like kind of understand and have someone demystify that for them, what would you say are the differences between the two?
Yeah, well, we have an article on this, so I recommend checking that out.
Okay.
But in terms of the differences, basically what I think about is someone has an idea, they're working on a company, it's very early stage. So you can go as early as like you literally have an idea, you have nothing built, or you have a product built, but people aren't really using it. That type of thing, that's all venture capital funding. So usually they're not working with a lot of numbers or data, mostly focusing on the founders. Is someone I want to back? It's a gradient. It's not like a bucket, not two buckets, but that's typically venture capital very early. So you're working more on the people and going to events to try to meet people and see what they're building and things like that. Private equity is much, much later stage. And for venture capital, they're buying a very small portion of the company. So, you're putting in X amount of money. That's the type of thing you see like on Shark Tank. So you're putting in, you're getting 5%. Where private equity, people are putting in hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars into a company and buying 95% of the company, like an insane amount. And these are companies that are big, established. You've probably heard of them, or if you haven't heard of them, they're bringing in hundreds of $millions of revenue, and you haven't heard of them because they're like some really weirdly niche company. But that's private equity. So you're focused a lot more on the numbers, the data. Is this a good investment? Am I getting my money back in a couple years? Venture capital is more the longer, will I get my money back in 10 years? Right. But another thing to think about is the model. So with private equity, they're putting in a lot of money into these companies, and they want to make 2x their money on basically every investment. Where for venture capital, and there's much less risk. If a company is bringing in hundreds of millions of dollars every year, the odds that they're going to collapse and be nothing in a couple of years is like very slim to none. So you're trying to 2x it. But with venture capital, you are putting in money into these companies that can literally just be an idea. And so there's a risk of about 50% literally failing next year being nothing. Right. So the ones, in order to return the average of the same of the private equity, the ones that you are investing in that are successful need to do 10, 20x. So the model is a very different, and private equity failure isn't really as much of an issue, where venture capital, you have to be comfortable with failure because the whole model, even the best investors have about 50% of their companies go to nothing. Right. So that's like a different thing to think about.
Right. Absolutely. Love that. Also, you've worked closely with VCs and startup through Girls into VC. So what would you say are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned about what investors look for in general?
Yeah, I think this existed always, but especially now as VC dollars aren't just being thrown around as much as they used to. A lot of people think that if you're building a company, you need to get VC funding, and that's the only type of funding you can get. And I think I try to make it extremely clear that that is not the case. And 95% of companies should not get VC funding. And so it's really, really important to think what types of companies are getting that. And I think so many people struggle with, they're trying to perfect their pitch deck and everything, and are like, oh, what's the little thing that I'm not getting investment, where it's just, they shouldn't even be trying to go for VC money. It's not like whether it's a good investment or a bad investment or how much money they can get from VCs. It's just not the model. Right. And so you're looking, like I said, since most companies fail, the companies that are successful need to do 10, 20x. Mm-hmm. And that's just typically not the margins of a consumer business or something like that. So that's why there's a big shift now towards healthcare and software, because really those are the types of companies that can produce 20x. Mm-hmm. And so that's why B2B SaaS is thrown around a lot. It's much easier. They're much higher margins, much lower operating costs. So those are typically the companies that VCs love. Of course, there are consumer companies and people are investing in those things, but generally I'd say take a look at like, really, is the business that I'm building meant for VCs, or am I better in another path? And and in terms of the company, I think it depends on the stage of how you sell it. You know, if you're a really late stage company, focus on the numbers. Why is this growing? Why is this a good investment? If you're early stage, why are you an investment? They're not investing in the company. Most companies change. They're investing in the person. Why are you a good person? And why are you a good person to build this company? Now, basically, unless you're like a PhD machine learning researcher, no idea is a new idea. Someone else has had it. So it really is, why are you the person that's going to make this successful?
Awesome. I love that. Love that so much. I remember at the event, we looked at the stat that really stood out to me, which was like 7% of VCs are women. And I was like, wait, what? I did not know that before.
Yeah.
And I think it got me thinking about, why do you think representation matters so much? Not just for investors, but also for the startups that they fund.
Yeah. I mean, I could go like 50 hours on this. 2%, as you said, 7% of venture capitalists are women. 2% of VC dollars go towards only women teams. So the number is a little higher if you look at co-ed teams, but only women is 2%, which I think typically people don't know. But I think it is so important. If you look at the companies men are building, they're geared towards men. They're the companies that men want. I mean, even if you look so randomly, I was like going on a deep dive on this, and there's so many medicines that are only tested on men's bodies, which is crazy. Even like car crashes are only tested on male dummies. Like, there's so many things in our world that are built by men, and so they're geared towards men. They're tested for men, where it's just a completely different thing when you have a woman building a business, because they're, it's 50%. It's not a small thing. I remember, one of the investors who didn't come to our conference, but she spoke in at a bunch of girls in VC, like Zooms and things, is that she said, she's investing in startups for women's health. And an investor said to her, don't you think that's a little niche? And she's like, no, it's like 50% of the human population. Wow. And so I think that's kind of the mindset, and it's really important to have female founders. I mean, that's one thing in terms of companies are building too. It's a huge deteriorator for people if they're not having role models and mentors. I think that role models is an absolutely hugely important thing and not given enough credit. And so if you are not seeing someone who looks like you building a company, you are never going to build a company. And I think that's just the reality of life. And there's so many other things that we should be doing. But, you can teach coding to as many girls as you want, unless they're seeing a woman who can code running $1 billion company. They're never going to aspire to be that, because you can't be what you don't see. And so they're literally never going to think that they can build $1 billion company, because no one has. And so, or no one that they know has. And so I think that's like completely underrated.
No, absolutely. I think growing up, I didn't really know a lot about this. And I'm like, oh, I thought it would end by the time I grow up. And it still hasn't. I'm like, the next generation is fighting for this as well. What advice would you give to someone that wants to get into venture capital, especially?
Yeah. If you want to get into venture capital, so we put together like 100, 200 page document of like literally
those links so that I can
what is venture capital, how to get into venture capital, because that is always the question I get. I think the really nice thing about venture capital is you can do 99% of the job without a job. And so, except for physically writing a check, which you need money to do. Well, you don't need a job, you just need the money, but typically, that's not accessible. But you can do basically everything else. You can go out and meet with founders. That's arguably the most important part of being venture capitalist, is finding the people that you'd invest in. You can go out, you can talk to people, you can make a list of all the companies you'd invest in. You can write articles on what are the fields you're interested in. What do you think is going to happen in terms of investments? What are the sectors that people should be investing in? You can do all of that with absolutely no capital and no job. And so I think that that's huge in VC, because, VC is not like a banking or consulting where they're hiring thousands of people coming out of colleges. It's very relationship based. So you need to like start doing this in order to actually even break in, because they're not even posting jobs, which is like a crazy thing. And so with Girls into VC, I have a lot of people reach out that are working at companies saying, hey, we want a girl to help us or be an intern, or we're hiring, like, let us know who, which is awesome, but you need to build those connections. So if you're meeting with VCs and you know founders, VCs want founders. So if you know founders, that's what they want. You can send emails to VCs being like, hey, these are 10 founders that align with your portfolio. I think you would really like them. Let me know if you want an intro to any of them. You will probably get a job. If they're quality startups, you would probably get a job. And so I think just really taking the initiative to do that is absolutely necessary.
Awesome. I love this so much. I think it's a very exciting career path, even though it's got nothing to do with me. I'm always like by that. Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's all I had for you. Is there something you want to say and talk a little bit more about Girls into VC and how people can get involved?
Yeah, so if you go to girlsintovc.com, that's our website, and you can sign up for a newsletter. We share all information there. You can also follow us on social media. It's Girls into VC everywhere. Yeah, we have, like I mentioned, the resource document on our page. We have articles, everything like that. And yeah, that's
awesome. I love that. Thank you so much. It was great talking to you.
Thank you, you too.